What if the image of a perfect royal family was nothing more than a polished illusion? What if, beneath the carefully staged photos, the gleaming palaces, and the rehearsed smiles, there lurked a question so explosive it could bring the House of Windsor to its knees? Tonight, we step into that shadowy space. A space where trust collides with suspicion, where whispers echo louder than proclamations, and where Prince Harry's very identity as a father is suddenly up for debate. And the man pulling back the curtain? Tom Bower, a relentless biographer, an unforgiving investigator, a figure who has made a career out of exposing the truths that powerful people would rather bury. Bower is not throwing random accusations into the air. He knows exactly how to leave breadcrumbs that ignite speculation and force the public to question what they thought was untouchable. This time, he's hinting at something more dangerous than a political scandal, more sensitive than a financial slip-up. He's hinting at the bloodline itself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But before we get lost in speculation, let's step back and consider what makes this moment so electrifying. Why now? Why is the panic in Prince Harry's eyes suddenly visible, even in the tightly controlled world of palace PR? Why is Meghan's silence louder than any official denial could ever be? Think about it. The royal family has always been obsessed with legitimacy. From the earliest kings and queens, bloodlines were the ultimate source of power. Wars were fought over disputed heirs. Nations shifted when succession was questioned. And now, in the 21st century, could the same specter be haunting the newest generation of royals? Could little Archie Harrison, celebrated as the bridge between tradition and modernity, become the lightning rod for whispers that won't go away? The stakes are staggering. If the rumors have any truth, it's not just a matter of gossip. It's a matter of titles, inheritance, and identity. It's about who belongs and who doesn't in one of the most scrutinized families on earth. And at the center of it all is a young boy, oblivious to the storm his very existence has triggered. Now imagine being Harry, a man scarred by his mother's tragic death, a man who has spent his entire adult life wrestling with the suffocating weight of the crown, a man who thought he'd finally found freedom in Meghan, a partner, an ally, someone who promised a new chapter. And yet, just as he escapes the palace walls, the whispers follow him. Only this time, they cut deeper. They question not just his choices, but his bloodline, his fatherhood, his role in history itself. And here's where Bower steps in like a ghost in the night. He doesn't come out and scream the accusation. No, that's not his style. Instead, he drops hints, carefully chosen words that pierce the polished royal narrative. He speaks of doubts inside the palace. He references unanswered questions and hushed conversations. He never says it outright, but the implication is clear enough to send shockwaves through anyone listening closely. Have you noticed how carefully Harry and Meghan have guarded Archie's story? From the beginning, everything felt off. Remember how Archie's birth was announced hours after it happened, breaking with tradition? Remember the secrecy surrounding his christening, the refusal to name his godparents, the staged photographs released only on their terms? At the time, it was brushed off as a modern couple wanting privacy. But what if it was more than that? What if it was about control? Control of a narrative they couldn't afford to let slip. Now, I'm not saying the whispers are true. But the fact that they exist, and that Tom Bower is feeding them, is enough to stir the pot in ways that leave Harry visibly shaken. Because if the public begins to believe there might be a question mark over Archie's paternity, then the foundation of Harry's carefully built new life starts to crack. Let's pause for a moment and ask the question out loud. Why would palace insiders ever doubt Archie's parentage in the first place? Was it Meghan's history, the way she disrupted the royal playbook, the way she clashed with courtiers and broke traditions? Or was it Harry's own behavior, his defensiveness, his quickness to lash out whenever questions arose? Suspicion doesn't sprout out of nowhere. It grows in soil already fertile with mistrust. And here's where the timing gets fascinating. Harry and Meghan are already battling a storm of public criticism. Their Netflix projects, their interviews, their financial struggles, it all paints a picture of a couple under pressure. Into this fragile moment, Tom Bower drops his hints. He doesn't need to prove them. He doesn't need to show evidence. All he needs to do is whisper just loudly enough, and the world will do the rest. Do you see the brilliance in that strategy? By refusing to state it outright, Bauer shields himself from direct backlash while planting seeds that grow wild in the public imagination. And Harry knows it. That's why his panic is so visible. He knows that once the question is asked, it can never be unasked. Once the doubt exists, no amount of PR can erase it completely. And this leads us to the heart of the introduction. The story isn't just about Archie's paternity. It's about the power of suspicion. It's about how a carefully placed hint can destabilize one of the most famous families in the world. It's about how truth and rumor can merge until no one knows the difference. Let me ask you directly. If you were in Harry's shoes, would you panic? Would you lash out? Or would you try to ignore it, hoping it fades away? Because here's the cruel reality. Ignoring whispers often makes them louder. Denying them can make you look guilty. Defending too strongly can make people think you're hiding something. In other words, Harry is trapped in a no-win situation. That's why this story matters now. Because it's not just gossip, it's a psychological chess match, and Harry's every move is being watched. One misstep, and the public will think they've spotted the crack in his armor. One slip, and the narrative spirals beyond his control. But let's be clear, this is only the beginning. What you've heard so far is the setup, the opening act in a drama that stretches back to the earliest days of Harry and Meghan's romance. Through their wedding, Archie's birth, the exit from royal duties, and beyond. Each chapter adds a layer. Each revelation pulls back another veil, until the truth, or something like it, emerges. So as we move forward, remember this. The introduction was never meant to answer the question. It was meant to plant it in your mind, to make you lean closer, to make your heart beat just a little faster as you wonder, could it be true? That's the power of a good exposé. It doesn't hand you the truth on a silver platter. It forces you to wrestle with it, to ask yourself what you believe and why. And so, we end this introduction with a cliffhanger, because the real story hasn't even begun. We've set the stage. We've seen the stakes. We've heard the whispers. But the next step takes us deeper into the shadows, where Tom Bauer himself waits with the first of his devastating hints. What he suggests isn't just controversial, it's dangerous. Because once you hear it, you'll never look at Archie's story the same way again. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Who is Tom Bauer, and why does his name strike fear into the most powerful circles of Britain? It isn't because he holds office or wields armies. It isn't even because he sits inside palace walls. It's because of one weapon, truth. Or rather, his ruthless version of it. For decades, Tom Bauer has made a career of prying open the lives of politicians, business moguls, and royals, dragging their darkest secrets into the spotlight. And now, his gaze has fixed firmly on Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and, most dangerously, the legitimacy of their son, Archie Harrison. Think about this for a moment. When most biographers write about the royals, they lean on charm, access, and subtle praise. They protect their sources, they flatter their subjects, and they tiptoe around controversy. Tom Bauer does the opposite. He hunts controversy. He thrives on it. His books are not bedtime reading for the faint of heart. They are landmines, each page a potential explosion. He has been called ruthless, unforgiving, even vindictive. But he has also been called accurate. And that combination makes him uniquely dangerous. Let's rewind. Before Meghan Markle ever entered the royal picture, Bauer had already carved out his reputation. He exposed shady dealings in business. He uncovered lies in politics. He embarrassed men who thought they were untouchable. His style was always the same. Gather whispers, chase down insiders, connect dots others ignored, and then present the narrative with a sharp, almost theatrical punch. He never pretends to be neutral. He aims to shock. And shock is exactly what he delivered when he set his sights on Meghan. His book wasn't a polite chronicle of her life. It was a sledgehammer. Page after page, he painted her as manipulative, ambitious, calculating. Whether you agree or not, you can't deny one thing. He forced people to question her. He ripped apart the fairy tale image and replaced it with a picture of someone scheming her way up the royal ladder. But here's where it gets darker. When Tom Bauer turns his pen toward the question of Archie Harrison, the implications go far beyond Meghan's reputation. This isn't just about whether Meghan was ambitious or manipulative. This is about bloodlines. This is about whether Harry is truly Archie's biological father. Stop for a second and think about that. Do you feel the weight of it? In a monarchy built on centuries of bloodline obsession, even the faintest hint of illegitimacy is dynamite. That's why Harry's panic makes sense. If Bauer were only attacking Meghan's character, Harry could fight back with words, lawsuits, or interviews. But if Bauer is hinting at doubts about Archie's paternity, Harry has no defense. DNA is unforgiving. Whispers are immortal. Now, you might ask, is Tom Bauer just stirring the pot for book sales? Maybe. But here's what makes his approach so effective. He rarely states the accusation directly. He plants seeds. He drops phrases like "insiders doubted" or "whispers around the palace suggested." He leaves gaps that the audience fills in with their own imagination. And once those seeds are planted, they grow uncontrollably. People start connecting dots that may not even exist. And suddenly, suspicion feels like fact. Do you see how dangerous that is? By not saying it outright, Bauer can't be cornered legally. He can always claim he was quoting insiders or merely reporting whispers. But at the same time, the damage is done. The doubt is already alive. And Harry knows it. Meghan knows it. The palace knows it. Once unleashed, rumors like these are impossible to kill. Let's make it even more dramatic. Imagine you are Meghan, sitting in your California mansion, scrolling through the headlines. You see Bauer's name. You see the words "questions" inside the palace. You see your son's name linked with paternity doubts. How would you react? Would you explode in rage? Would you panic behind the scenes? Or would you stay silent, hoping that acknowledging it would only give the rumor power? Meghan chose silence, and that silence only fueled the fire. Now, let's step into Harry's shoes. He's always been protective of Meghan, always quick to defend her against attacks. But how do you defend yourself when the attack isn't about your wife? It's about your child. And not just about your child, but about whether you are even the father? Every man knows the sting of such a question. For Harry, it must feel like a blade twisting in his heart. Add to that the fact that the entire world is watching, and you begin to see why panic seeps through his carefully staged appearances. Here's a surprising fact you may not know. Tom Bauer has written exposés on figures far more powerful than Harry and Meghan. He's taken on billionaires, prime ministers, and even intelligence agencies. And yet, he's still standing. He's still respected. He's still feared. That track record means when he drops a hint about Meghan and Archie, people listen. They don't dismiss it as tabloid nonsense. They lean in. They wonder if this time, too, he's onto something real. So let me ask you, is Bauer revealing the truth, or is he simply playing a masterful psychological game? Does it even matter? Because in the court of public opinion, the truth is often irrelevant. What matters is perception. And perception is precisely what Bauer is shaping with every carefully chosen word. This is why Chapter 1 matters so much. To understand the storm around Harry and Meghan, you must first understand the man fanning the flames. Tom Bauer is not a random gossip columnist. He is a professional provocateur with decades of experience dismantling reputations. He knows exactly where to poke, exactly how to phrase things, exactly when to hold back, and when to unleash. He is, in many ways, the puppet master of this drama. But don't mistake him for omnipotent. His books have critics. Some call him biased, sensationalist, even cruel. And maybe he is. But ask yourself this. Why does the palace, time and again, tremble at the mention of his name? Why do public figures, despite denials, secretly fear being the subject of his next book? The answer is simple, because his words stick. They linger. They stain reputations in ways that no PR campaign can wash away. And so here we are. The shadow of Tom Bauer looms large over Harry, Meghan, and Archie. His hints have already caused ripples that may soon become waves. Harry is panicking. Meghan is silent. The palace is whispering. And the world is listening. But what exactly did Bauer say? What are these whispers that he claims to have heard from palace insiders? And how do they connect directly to Archie's birth and the strange secrecy that surrounded it? That is the door we open next. And once you step through, the picture of Meghan herself takes center stage. Because before you can understand the whispers about Archie, you have to understand why Meghan became the lightning rod for doubt in the first place. What comes next isn't just about suspicion. It's about the woman at the center of it all. And the revelations will make even Bauer's harshest words feel like an appetizer. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She was the Hollywood actress who turned into a duchess, the glamorous outsider who dared to walk into the oldest monarchy in Europe. For some, Meghan Markle was the breath of fresh air the royal family needed. For others, she was a storm brewing in plain sight. But here's the real question. How did a woman who seemed destined to modernize the monarchy end up at the center of whispers about her own child's legitimacy? That's the paradox. Meghan was hailed as a symbol of change. She was a biracial American woman stepping into an institution long criticized for being stiff, outdated, and overwhelmingly white. At first, the story felt like a fairy tale. The wedding was broadcast to millions around the world. People cheered the idea that the monarchy had finally caught up with the times. Meghan was charismatic, photogenic, and confident. She didn't just marry into royalty. She seemed to redefine it. But almost immediately, cracks began to show. Meghan's relationship with palace staff was fraught. Reports leaked of tense exchanges, staff members reduced to tears, and an atmosphere of hostility behind closed doors. Some called her ambitious. Others accused her of being demanding. Depending on whom you asked, she was either a strong modern woman standing her ground or a manipulative outsider who refused to adapt to tradition. And this is where Tom Bower steps in. His portrait of Meghan wasn't flattering, it was forensic. He painted her as someone who had always chased status, who knew how to mold her image, who saw the royal family not as a burden, but as the ultimate prize. Bower quoted friends, acquaintances, former colleagues, and insiders who described Meghan in ways that contradicted the image she projected publicly. For every fan who saw her as a victim of media cruelty, Bower provided a counter-narrative. Meghan as strategist, Meghan as manipulator, Meghan as someone who calculated every move. Now ask yourself this. If the public is already split on Meghan's character, what happens when the question shifts from her ambition to her motherhood? Suddenly, the whispers cut deeper. If you already doubt her motives, are you more likely to believe whispers that cast doubt on her child's legitimacy? That's the danger of perception. Once people see cracks in a person's story, they start to imagine cracks everywhere. Let's break down how Meghan's history fed into this. Before Harry, Meghan's relationships were scrutinized. Her divorce from Trevor Engelson was painted as a sign of her restlessness. Her career trajectory, from small television roles to a breakout part in Suits, was seen as persistence by some, opportunism by others. By the time she met Harry, Meghan was already aware of how to shape her public narrative. But shaping a Hollywood image and shaping a royal image are two very different beasts. The palace operates on centuries of tradition. Meghan operated on instinct, ambition, and modern PR. The collision was inevitable. And here's where the whispers grow louder. According to Bower, Meghan's clash with tradition wasn't just about clothing choices or protocol. It was about control. Who gets to tell the story? Who decides how much the public knows? Meghan insisted on rewriting the rules. And when Archie came into the picture, that instinct for control only intensified. From the secrecy surrounding his birth to the refusal to follow traditional christening rituals, Meghan and Harry made choices that baffled royal watchers. Do you remember the moment they announced Archie's birth? Instead of the familiar scene outside the hospital with photographers and cheering crowds, the Sussexes opted for a carefully staged photo call days later. No traditional balcony moment, no immediate unveiling. Just silence, followed by tightly controlled images. At the time, it was dismissed as their desire for privacy. But hindsight, and Bower's sharp insinuations, make it look suspicious. Why so much secrecy? Why so many deviations from tradition? This is where the microscope turns unforgiving. People began to ask, was Meghan hiding something? Was she trying to shield Archie? Or was she trying to shield herself? Every choice she made, every silence, every deviation became fertile ground for speculation. And Tom Bower was there to document it all, to collect every whisper, every uneasy glance, every deviation from the royal script. Now, let's not forget the emotional layer. Meghan has often spoken about the cruelty of the press, about the racist undertones in coverage, about how she felt hounded and unsafe. These aren't small claims. They carry real emotional weight. But here's the irony. The more she complained about the media, the more attention she attracted. And the more attention she attracted, the more her every move was scrutinized. The cycle fed itself, creating the perfect storm. Imagine living under that kind of scrutiny. Every word you say dissected. Every facial expression analyzed. Every rumor magnified. And yet, Meghan projected confidence. To her supporters, that made her heroic. To her critics, the secrecy deepened. When Meghan and Harry finally appeared with Archie 2 days later, it wasn't on the hospital steps. It was inside Windsor Castle. A staged photo call, tightly controlled, with only a handful of reporters allowed in. The images were beautiful, yes, but they didn't feel real. They felt curated, manufactured, a performance rather than a presentation. And that's when the whispers began. Why the delay? Why the secrecy? Why break from tradition so dramatically? Were Harry and Meghan simply trying to assert their independence? Or were they hiding something? Now, pause for a moment and ask yourself this. If you were a royal insider, used to the smooth machine of tradition, wouldn't this break in protocol raise your suspicions? The monarchy thrives on ritual for a reason. It keeps questions away. But when you deviate from the script, people start asking questions. And once the questions start, they spread like wildfire. Let's dig deeper into the christening. Traditionally, royal christenings are public events, steeped in ceremony, with photographers capturing the moment for history. But Archie's was private, very private. Harry and Meghan refused to release the names of his godparents. They issued only carefully staged photos. Once again, they controlled the narrative. And once again, the public was left with unanswered questions. Some saw this as modern parenting, a refreshing rejection of media intrusion. Others saw it as secrecy bordering on suspicious. And when Tom Bower came along, he leaned into the latter interpretation. For Bower, these choices weren't about privacy. They were about control and maybe even concealment. And that's where the whispers about Archie's true paternity began to gain traction. But let's not forget the emotional side of this. Harry and Meghan were already under siege from the press. Meghan had spoken about her struggles during pregnancy, about feeling vulnerable and unsupported. Harry, haunted by memories of his mother, wanted desperately to shield Meghan and Archie from the same relentless spotlight. Their choices may well have been motivated by love and protection. But perception doesn't care about motives. Perception cares about appearances. And the appearance of secrecy was enough to fuel suspicion. Here's where the contradictions make everything worse. Harry and Meghan demanded privacy for Archie, yet they monetized their personal story through interviews, books, and streaming deals. Privacy when it suited them, exposure when it paid. That contradiction opened the door for critics to claim they weren't protecting Archie. They were protecting a narrative. And let's talk about the timing. Around Archie's birth, Harry and Meghan's relationship with the palace was already deteriorating. Tensions with William and Kate were rising. Staff were resigning. Rumors of Meghan's clashes with courtiers were spilling into the press. In that volatile atmosphere, the secrecy around Archie didn't just look odd, it looked suspicious. And Tom Bower, ever the opportunist, knew how to frame that suspicion into a devastating hint. Think about how fragile perception is. Imagine if Archie's birth had followed the script. Hospital steps, smiling photos, a visible christening. Would the whispers about paternity ever have taken hold? Probably not. But by deviating from tradition, Harry and Meghan unintentionally created a vacuum. And in a vacuum, whispers grow louder. Let's pause here and bring you into the picture. If you were a royal watcher, used to seeing the same traditions play out for decades, how would you have reacted to the secrecy? Would you have shrugged it off as modern parenting? Or would you have wondered if something was being hidden? This is the trap Harry and Meghan walked into. By trying to control the narrative, they lost control of perception. And then there was Harry's behavior. Instead of calm reassurance, he often seemed defensive, even agitated, when questioned about Archie. At one point, his irritation was palpable when reporters asked for details. That defensiveness only added fuel to the fire. Because when people see panic, they assume guilt. And when Tom Bower highlights that defensiveness, the implication is clear. Harry was protecting more than just privacy. Let's not overlook the symbolism. Archie was supposed to be the bridge between old and new, the child who symbolized a modern monarchy. Instead, he became the lightning rod for suspicion. His very existence deepened the rift between Harry and the palace. His birth, instead of uniting, divided. And that division created the perfect breeding ground for Tom Bower's whispers. But here's the cruel irony. Archie himself is innocent. A baby caught in the crossfire of perception, secrecy, and speculation. He didn't choose to be born into the royal family. He didn't choose to become the subject of whispers. But his parents' choices, whether out of love, fear, or strategy, made him the center of a controversy that continues to swirl. So let's recap. Archie's arrival should have been simple. It should have been joyful. It should have reassured the world that the royal family endures. Instead, it became complicated, secretive, and divisive. And once Tom Bower picked up those threads, he wove them into a narrative that questioned not just Meghan's character, but Harry's fatherhood. And that leads us to the next chapter. Because if Archie's birth created the conditions for whispers, it was the palace itself, the hushed conversations, the sideways glances, the private doubts, that gave those whispers life. And once those whispers started echoing through Buckingham's gilded halls, they became impossible to silence. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. In the royal family, silence often says more than words. Behind those gilded gates, whispers can destroy reputations faster than headlines ever could. And when Archie Harrison was born, whispers began to circulate, quiet at first, confined to corridors, muttered in confidence. But like smoke from an unseen fire, they spread. And once smoke rises in Buckingham Palace, the world inevitably smells it. Here's the brutal truth. The monarchy has always been obsessed with image. Every gesture, every smile, every handshake is rehearsed, monitored, perfected. Mistakes aren't just mistakes, they're scandals. Whispers aren't just gossip, they're weapons. And Archie's arrival, cloaked in secrecy and deviation from tradition, provided fertile ground for whispers to bloom. Think of how it might have started. A staff member notices something odd. A courtier hears a rumor. An aide repeats it in a hushed tone over tea. At first, it's nothing, just a murmur. But the palace is a pressure cooker. Everyone watches everyone. Every action is scrutinized. And in that environment, a single doubt can multiply into a full-blown narrative. So what were these whispers? Tom Bower suggests they weren't about Meghan's behavior alone, though that was controversial enough. They were about Archie. Specifically, about whether Prince Harry was truly his biological father. Now, stop and let that sink in. Inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, where legitimacy is everything, even the slightest hint of doubt about a child's parentage is explosive. Imagine being in Harry's shoes. You walk through the palace corridors, and though no one says it outright, you feel the weight of suspicion in every glance. You hear the half-sentences, the clipped conversations that stop when you enter the room. Doubt, once born, doesn't need evidence. It feeds on silence. It thrives on secrecy. And the more Harry and Meghan insisted on privacy around Archie, the louder the whispers became. Let's pause here and ask, why would palace insiders even question Archie's paternity? Is it because of Meghan's past? Because of her clashes with tradition? Because of her refusal to play by the rules? Or was it because Harry himself seemed defensive, even paranoid, when confronted with questions about his new family? Suspicion rarely emerges from thin air. It grows in the cracks of mistrust already present. And the cracks were everywhere. Harry was already estranged from William. Meghan was already at odds with staff. The Queen herself was reportedly frustrated by their demands for independence. Into that fragile atmosphere, Archie's birth, with all its secrecy and strangeness, looked less like privacy and more like concealment. That's how whispers start, not with proof, but with perception. Tom Bower knew exactly how to frame this. He didn't accuse anyone directly. Instead, he pointed to those palace whispers, the quiet doubts that no one dared put in writing. By repeating them, he gave them life. By publishing them, he made them permanent. And once printed, whispers become part of history, whether true or not. Now, let's humanize this for a moment. Imagine you're a palisade. You've served the royals for decades. You've watched tradition upheld with military precision. And suddenly, here comes a new couple breaking every rule. They're secretive. They're defensive. They refuse to follow protocol. Would you start to wonder what they're hiding? Would you begin to whisper to colleagues? It's human nature. And in the palace, human nature is magnified. But here's the emotional dagger. Harry, who already carries the scars of being called the spare, now faces whispers that cut deeper than anything he's endured before. If Archie's paternity is doubted, Harry's identity as a father is questioned. His place in the royal lineage, already fragile, is threatened. For a man haunted by loss and desperate for belonging, that's a cruel fate. And what about Meghan? For her, the whispers weren't just an attack on her son. They were an attack on her womanhood, her marriage, her integrity. Meghan has always been a polarizing figure, but whispers about Archie hit below the belt. They undermined her role as mother. They painted her as deceptive, manipulative, dangerous. To her critics, the whispers confirmed what they already believed. To her supporters, they were proof of relentless cruelty. Let me bring you in here. If you were Meghan, would you confront the whispers head-on? Would you demand to set the record straight? Or would you stay silent, hoping that acknowledging them would only give them more power? Meghan chose silence. Harry chose defensiveness. And together, their responses, whether intentional or not, only fanned the flames. And let's not forget, the palace has always been a battlefield of whispers. From Edward VIII's abdication to Diana's troubled marriage, rumors have shaped history. Sometimes the whispers are true, sometimes they're not. But they always matter. They always leave scars. And in Archie's case, the scars are just beginning to show. Now consider this. Tom Bower didn't need to invent anything. All he had to do was echo what was already being said behind closed doors. By doing so, he gave those whispers legitimacy. He transformed gossip into a narrative, doubt into drama. And Harry, watching from California, must have felt the walls closing in. Because how do you fight whispers when the palace itself seems to be the source? Let's reflect for a moment on how dangerous this is. Whispers don't require evidence. They don't need DNA tests. They don't need proof. All they need is repetition. Repeat a whisper enough times, and it becomes truth in the minds of millions. And once truth and rumor blur, perception takes over. That's the nightmare Harry is living. So where does this leave us? On one hand, we have Harry and Meghan insisting on privacy, protecting Archie, and rejecting tradition. On the other, we have palace insiders whispering doubts, Tom Bower amplifying them, and the public left to fill in the gaps. It's a recipe for disaster, a storm that grows louder with each passing day. And here's the cruel twist. The whispers don't just question Archie, they divide the royal family itself. If some royals believe the whispers and others reject them, the unity of the monarchy is shattered. Brothers become enemies. Parents lose trust. The crown itself begins to wobble. All because of whispers no one dares to confront directly. But whispers alone aren't enough to tear a family apart. They need fuel. They need voices willing to speak them out loud. And that's where the divide truly begins. Because what came next wasn't just silence, it was confrontation. And that confrontation would leave scars that no one saw coming. Every monarchy in history has faced division, but the House of Windsor has always tried to present a united front, at least on the surface. Behind closed doors, it's a different story. Rivalries, jealousies, power struggles, they've always been there. But never had the divide felt so raw, so personal, so dangerous as when Archie Harrison was born. Because this time, the whispers weren't just about palace protocol or politics. They were about blood. And nothing splits a royal family faster than doubts about blood. The whispers that began in hushed tones soon created lines in the sand. People had to choose. Did they believe in Harry and Meghan's narrative of privacy, independence, and modernity? Or did they believe in tradition, transparency, and the palace script? Those choices weren't abstract. They fractured the family itself. At the center of the divide were two brothers, William and Harry. For years, they had been inseparable, bonded by grief after Diana's death, united against the relentless press, protective of one another. The heir and the spare, yes, but also a team. That bond, once unshakable, began to corrode. The whispers about Meghan's intentions, the secrecy around Archie's birth, and the questions raised by Tom Bower's hints pushed them further apart. William, the future king, is a man obsessed with stability. He thrives on duty, tradition, continuity. To him, every deviation is a threat to the crown. So when Harry and Meghan broke protocol, from refusing the hospital steps to hiding Archie's christening, William didn't just see independence. He saw rebellion. He saw cracks in the very foundation of the monarchy. Harry, on the other hand, saw it differently. He saw himself as protecting his wife and child from the same machine that had destroyed his mother. He saw William's demands for tradition as cold, heartless, unfeeling. And so the brothers clashed, not just over Archie, but over what the monarchy itself should mean in the modern world. Now imagine the conversations behind palace doors. One camp whispers, "They're hiding something." The other defends, "They just want privacy." One side mutters about Meghan being difficult, manipulative, even dangerous. The other insists she's misunderstood, targeted, and treated unfairly. The palace staff itself became divided, some loyal to William and Catherine, others sympathetic to Harry and Meghan. And like cracks in glass, those divisions only widened. Let's not underestimate how dangerous this is. A monarchy survives only as long as it projects unity. Once the public sees division, trust erodes. And when that division centers on whispers of paternity, the stakes skyrocket. Because if Archie's legitimacy is questioned, so is the entire Sussex narrative. And if Harry feels his family doesn't believe in him, the bond of brotherhood collapses. And collapse it did. Reports emerged of William warning Harry about Meghan, urging caution, suggesting he might be rushing into things. Harry bristled. To him, it wasn't brotherly concern, it was condescension. And as Bower later hinted, this was more than a marital disagreement. This was about whether William believed the whispers, whether William himself doubted Archie's place. Think about the cruelty of that. For Harry, the one person he should have been able to rely on, his brother, may have been among the doubters. And if William, the man groomed for kingship, harbored doubts, what did that mean for the rest of the family? Did Charles hear the whispers? Did courtiers repeat them to the Queen? The divide wasn't just about Harry and William anymore. It was about an entire palace split between loyalty and suspicion. Now, let's bring in Meghan. For her, the divide must have felt like confirmation of what she always feared, that she was never truly accepted. Imagine walking into a centuries-old institution, knowing people whisper about your motives, your past, your child. Imagine hearing that even your brother-in-law, the man who will one day be king, questions your choices. Would you stay and fight, or would you run? Meghan's choice, eventually, was clear. But in these early days, the tension was suffocating. Here's the irony. The more the palace divided, the more the whispers grew. One side's doubts fed the other side's defensiveness. One camp's suspicion amplified the other camp's secrecy. It was a vicious cycle. And Tom Bower, watching from the outside, saw the perfect storm forming. His book didn't create the divide, it exploited it. He simply wrote down what was already being whispered, and in doing so, turned a family rift into a global drama. Now, let me ask you, if you were in William's shoes, would you have confronted Harry directly? Would you have asked him if the whispers were true? Or would you have kept your doubts hidden, letting them poison the bond quietly? Both choices are dangerous. Both choices risk destroying trust. And perhaps William chose both, confronting Harry at times, staying silent at others. Either way, the damage was done. And what about the Queen? Elizabeth II built her reign on silence, on never explaining, never complaining. But even she must have felt the tremors of this divide. Imagine her position, a monarch in her 90s, trying to keep the family together while whispers threatened to unravel it. Did she believe the rumors? Or did she dismiss them as dangerous nonsense? We may never know. But the fact that they reached her ears at all shows how deep the divide had become. The divide wasn't just personal, it was institutional. Courtiers aligned with different camps. Advisors leaked competing narratives to the press. The tabloids fed off the division, spinning stories of Team Cambridge versus Team Sussex. And through it all, Archie remained the unspoken lightning rod. His very existence was both miracle and scandal, hope and doubt. Let's pause and reflect. A family that once presented itself as unbreakable now looked fractured. The whispers had done their damage. The palace was divided. And in that division, Harry's panic grew. Because if his own family doubted him, what hope did he have of convincing the public? But here's where it gets even darker. Whispers inside a family are one thing. But when those whispers start leaking to the outside, when journalists pick them up, when biographers like Tom Bower amplify them, they become something far more dangerous. They become weapons. And in the next phase of this story, those weapons would be turned directly on Meghan. Because the palace divide wasn't just about Archie. It was about the woman who brought Archie into the world. And once Meghan became the focal point of suspicion, the whispers turned into full-blown narratives. Narratives that would haunt her forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When Meghan Markle entered the royal family, she didn't just marry into tradition, she walked straight into a battlefield. But unlike centuries past, where royals fought wars with swords and armies, Meghan's war was waged with headlines, photographs, leaks, and lawsuits. A media war, one she believed she could win, one she thought she could control. But in trying to outmaneuver the press, Meghan may have fueled the very whispers she so desperate. Let's start with the obvious. Meghan was not naive. By the time she met Harry, she had already spent years in Hollywood, navigating the entertainment industry. She knew how publicity worked. She understood the dance between celebrities and tabloids. To her, image was currency. Attention was power. And for a while, that skill worked in her favor. She crafted a public persona as a humanitarian, an actress, a woman of substance. But once she joined the royal family, that skill became a double-edged sword. Because in the monarchy, controlling the narrative isn't just difficult, it's nearly impossible. The British press is ruthless. They build you up only to tear you down. At first, Meghan was celebrated, the glamorous American who added sparkle to a sometimes stuffy institution. The headlines were glowing, the photos flattering. But the honeymoon didn't last. Soon, the tone shifted. Stories began to emerge about her clashes with palace staff, her demands, her refusal to play by the rules. And once the press turned, they didn't stop. They dug deeper, searching for any crack in her story. How did Meghan respond? Not with silence, not with stoic smiles, as the royals have traditionally done. She fought back. She sued tabloids. She issued statements. She gave interviews. She spoke about racism, mental health struggles, and her desire for privacy. To her supporters, this was brave, a woman refusing to be silenced. To her critics, it was reckless, a duchess waging war against an institution that survives on silence. And here's where the contradiction bites hardest. Meghan claimed to want privacy for her family, yet she repeatedly chose exposure when it suited her. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the podcasts. Each time, she revealed intimate details about her life and marriage, while simultaneously demanding protection from the press. Privacy when convenient, publicity when profitable. That contradiction became a weapon for her critics. And in the hands of Tom Bower, it became evidence that Meghan couldn't be trusted. Now, think about how this plays into Archie's story. Every time Meghan tried to control her image, every time she went on the offensive, the press pushed back harder. When she sued, they dug deeper. When she claimed privacy, they demanded more access. And in that tug-of-war, the whispers about Archie found fertile ground. Because if Meghan was hiding one thing, people wondered, what else might she be hiding? Let's pause here and ask a direct question. Do you think Meghan underestimated the British press? Did she believe her Hollywood experience prepared her for the tabloids? Or did she overestimate her ability to control the royal narrative? Whatever the answer, one fact is undeniable. The press played the long game, and Meghan's media war only made the whispers louder. Consider the lawsuits. Meghan won some legal battles, yes, but in the process, private texts and emails became public. Details of her strained family relationships, her communication with aides, her carefully curated public statements, all of it spilled out in court documents. What was supposed to be a victory often turned into another public relations disaster. Every lawsuit gave the press more ammunition. And for critics like Bower, it was proof of manipulation, of image crafting gone too far. And then came the interviews. The Oprah sit-down was seismic. Meghan revealed her mental health struggles, claimed the palace denied her help, and most explosively, alleged that a senior royal had made comments about Archie's skin color. That revelation sent shockwaves across the globe. To Meghan's supporters, it confirmed everything they believed, that she had been mistreated, that she had been silenced, that racism was at play. But to her critics, it raised more questions. Which royal said it? Why not name them? Was the story exaggerated? Was Meghan using Archie as a shield in her war with the palace? This is the cruel genius of whispers. Once a question exists, it never goes away. Meghan's attempt to expose palace cruelty created sympathy, yes, but it also created doubt. And when doubt already surrounds a child's paternity, adding questions about race and secrecy only deepens the divide. Now imagine being Harry during all this. His wife is at war with the press. His family is divided. His child is the subject of whispers he can't control. Harry, who has always despised the press for their role in his mother's death, must have felt cornered. And when people feel cornered, they panic. That panic, visible in his interviews, only reinforced the whispers Tom Bower would later amplify. And let's not forget Meghan's strategy with American media. In the US, she was celebrated, often treated with sympathy. But in Britain, the tone was harsher, more skeptical. This transatlantic divide created another contradiction. Meghan as victim in America, Meghan as manipulator in the UK. And when public opinion is split, whispers thrive. Because no one knows what to believe. And in that uncertainty, rumors grow. Here's a surprising fact. In the digital age, Meghan's war with the press wasn't just about newspapers. It was about algorithms. Every headline, every YouTube video, every TikTok clip fed into a cycle of speculation. The more Meghan tried to fight the narrative, the more content was created about her. The more content, the more whispers spread. It was an endless loop. And Archie, though still a child, became part of that loop. His name attached to doubts, his image scrutinized, his story weaponized. So ask yourself this: was Meghan's war with the press ever winnable? Could anyone, even with Hollywood savvy, truly control the British tabloids? Or was she doomed from the start, playing a game designed for her to lose? And yet, here's the tragedy. Meghan may have believed she was protecting her family by fighting back. She may have thought lawsuits, interviews, and documentaries would set the record straight. But instead, each battle only entrenched the divide, deepened the suspicion, and gave Tom Bower more fuel. By the time his book dropped, the public was primed to believe the worst. The whispers about Archie didn't survive in spite of Meghan's media war. They thrived because of it. Her every move, every contradiction, every emotional outburst became part of the narrative. The press wanted drama. Meghan provided it. And once drama exists, whispers become headlines. But here's where it gets even darker. The whispers were no longer just confined to the press or the palace. They seeped into the public. Ordinary people, fans and critics alike, debated Archie's legitimacy on social media, in forums, in comment sections. Millions of strangers speculating about a child's bloodline, fueled by Bower's hints and Meghan's contradictions. That's the true cost of the media war. And so, as this chapter closes, we see the battlefield clearly. On one side, Meghan, fighting with every tool she knows: lawsuits, interviews, PR strategies. On the other, the press, relentless, ruthless, unyielding. And caught in the middle, Archie, a child who never chose to be a weapon in this war. But whispers don't just thrive in the press. They echo even louder in the palace itself. And when those whispers begin to touch on the most dangerous question of all, DNA, the stakes rise to a level no media war can contain. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. 3 letters. That's all it takes to rattle the foundations of monarchy. DNA. In most families, DNA is a tool for science, a way to settle disputes or trace ancestry. But in the royal family, DNA is everything. It is legitimacy. It is history. It is power. Without it, crowns topple and dynasties collapse. And so when whispers inside the palace began to brush against those 3 letters in connection with Archie Harrison, the panic became unbearable. Think about the symbolism for a moment. For centuries, kings and queens have lived and died by questions of bloodline. Wars were fought over disputed heirs. Thrones were lost because a child's parentage was doubted. Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church over the desperate need for a legitimate male heir. Elizabeth I's reign was shadowed by questions of succession. Even whispers, even rumors, even the faintest hint that a child might not be true could ignite rebellion. Bloodline isn't just a detail. It is the monarchy itself. So when Tom Bower dropped his careful hints about whispers inside the palace, doubting Harry's role as Archie's biological father, he wasn't just stirring gossip. He was striking at the very heart of monarchy. Because if Archie isn't Harry's son, then what does that mean for his place in history? What does it mean for titles, inheritance, legacy? What does it mean for Harry himself, a man already haunted by doubts about his own father, Prince Charles? Yes, let's pause there. The irony is almost cruel. For decades, whispers circled Harry's own paternity. Rumors that he was not Charles's son, but the result of Diana's affair with James Hewitt. Harry has lived his entire life under that shadow, even though the timelines debunk it. Still, the whispers persisted. And now, history seemed to be repeating itself, this time with Harry as the target. Not the rumored illegitimate child, but the rumored illegitimate father. Imagine the psychological torment of that. Let me ask you directly, could you endure that? Could you live your life with strangers questioning your fatherhood, whispering that your child might not be yours? For most people, it would be unbearable. For Harry, it's magnified 1,000 times by the press, the palace, and now Tom Bower's book. Here's the chilling part. No DNA test has ever been publicly demanded. No proof has ever been requested. The whispers exist entirely in rumor. And yet, in a monarchy built on lineage, rumor is almost as deadly as fact. Once the question is asked, it can never be unasked. Once the doubt exists, it clings to history forever. Consider the secrecy around Archie's birth. No hospital steps. No immediate announcement. No transparency. Add to that the secrecy of his christening, the refusal to name godparents, the staged photos. Every deviation from tradition became fuel for whispers. And once the word DNA was whispered, all those details suddenly looked suspicious. People began connecting dots that may never have existed. That's the danger of doubt. It doesn't need evidence. It only needs suggestion. And Tom Bower is a master of suggestion. He didn't claim Archie wasn't Harry's son. He didn't state it outright. Instead, he wrote of insiders who whispered their doubts. He hinted at conversations. He framed questions without answers. That's all it takes. Because in the public's imagination, questions quickly turn into conclusions. And conclusions become beliefs. Now let's step back and add some historical perspective. The British monarchy has faced paternity scandals before. Illegitimate children have existed for centuries, some acknowledged, most hidden. The difference is this. In past centuries, whispers could be contained. Today, in the age of social media and instant headlines, whispers spread globally in seconds. What was once a private rumor whispered in a drawing room becomes a trending topic on Twitter. The power of DNA speculation today is far more devastating than it ever was before. Think of the irony. In a world where science can prove paternity beyond a doubt, the royal family remains shackled by rumor. A simple DNA test could silence everything. But the very act of taking such a test would confirm the seriousness of the suspicion. The monarchy doesn't take DNA tests to prove legitimacy. They rely on tradition, image, continuity. And so they are trapped. They cannot prove, and they cannot disprove. They can only endure the whispers. Now let's bring this back to Harry. His panic makes sense. He knows better than anyone the scars whispers can leave. He grew up hearing that Charles wasn't his father. He grew up seeing tabloids mock him, compare his features to James Hewitt. Even if he knew the rumors weren't true, he couldn't escape them. And now, Archie is the one in the crosshairs. His own son condemned to live under the same shadow. For Harry, it must feel like history is repeating itself in the cruelest way possible. And what about Meghan? For her, whispers about Archie's paternity strike at the core of her identity as a wife and mother. They're not just attacks on her, they're attacks on her family. For a woman already battling accusations of manipulation and ambition, this was the ultimate insult. And yet, by staying silent, by refusing to confront the whispers head-on, Meghan left space for speculation to grow. Was it dignity? Was it strategy? Or was it fear that denying the whispers would give them even more oxygen? Here's where the emotional irony cuts deepest. Archie himself is just a child, blissfully unaware of the storm surrounding him. He doesn't know that his name has been dragged into debates about DNA, legitimacy, and monarchy. But one day he will. One day, he will read the books, the articles, the speculation. One day, he will see Tom Bower's hints and the panic they caused. And when that day comes, how will he see his parents? As protectors? As fighters? Or as people who failed to shield him from whispers that should never have existed? Now, let's talk about the power of DNA in the public imagination. Even without evidence, the idea of a DNA test has become a cultural obsession. TV shows are built around it. Talk shows thrive on dramatic reveals. "You are the father" has become a catchphrase of modern drama. And when that drama attaches itself to royalty, the stakes multiply. People don't just want to know, they demand to know. They feel entitled to answers about a child who never chose the spotlight. And here's the chilling question. What if the palace itself, in private, considered DNA testing? What if, behind those closed doors, the whispers grew so loud that someone suggested proof? Would Harry have agreed? Would Meghan? Would the Queen? We may never know. But the fact that the question even exists shows how poisonous the whispers became. Let's pause and reflect. This chapter isn't about proving or disproving Archie's paternity. It's about the destructive power of doubt. It's about how 3 letters, DNA, can destabilize a family, a marriage, even a monarchy. And it's about how Tom Bower, by amplifying whispers, dragged those 3 letters out of the palace shadows and into the public arena. But whispers about DNA don't stay whispers for long. They push people to breaking points. They create panic. They fuel division. And in Harry's case, they triggered something darker, a personal unraveling. Because defending Meghan was one thing. Defending his son against whispers of illegitimacy was another. And as those whispers grew louder, Harry himself began to break. And that breaking point would lead us into the next stage of this story. Because whispers aren't just destructive, they are transformative. They change relationships. They change people. And for Harry, they would change him forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. For most of his life, Prince Harry has been called many things: the cheeky prince, the spare, the wild child, the soldier, the rebel, the husband who broke away. But as whispers about Archie's paternity began to swirl louder, a new description began to stick: fragile. The one thing Harry always feared. Being exposed, doubted, diminished, was happening before his eyes. And the pressure pushed him to the edge. You could see it in his interviews. The flashes of irritation. The clipped answers. The forced smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. He wasn't just tired of the media, he was panicking. Because for Harry, this wasn't a story he could laugh off or dismiss. This was about his child. His role as a father. His identity as a man. The whispers weren't just attacking Meghan. They were attacking him. Think back to Harry's past. He lost his mother in a storm of paparazzi flashbulbs. He grew up blaming the press for her death. He spent his teenage years lashing out, drinking, fighting, wearing a Nazi costume to a party, embarrassing the family with scandals. Anger has always been his armor. But now, that armor was cracking. Because anger couldn't silence whispers. Rage couldn't erase doubts. And DNA, those 3 letters, threatened to undo everything. What does a man do when he feels the world closing in? He clings tighter. He becomes defensive. He lashes out at the very people trying to help. And Harry did all of that. Reports described him as short-tempered, volatile, unpredictable. Staff members quit. Family members kept their distance. Even interviews meant to project calm came across as desperate. Every word, every gesture seemed to scream, "I'm losing control." And that's the tragedy. In trying to protect his family, Harry may have confirmed the very doubts he wanted to crush. Because panic looks like guilt. Defensiveness looks like secrecy. And the more Harry bristled, the more the whispers seemed credible. It was a cruel feedback loop. The harder he fought, the weaker he appeared. Let's pause and ask the question. If you were Harry, how would you have handled it? Would you have ignored the whispers, refusing to dignify them? Or would you have stood tall, declaring your truth, daring the world to question you? Harry chose a third option: to panic, to defend, to fight every rumor head-on. And in doing so, he gave those rumors life. Remember his interviews during this time? The stiff posture, the tense jaw, the flash of anger when questions strayed too close to Meghan or Archie. He wasn't just answering, he was battling. He wasn't just speaking, he was pleading. And the public could sense it. Once the public senses desperation, the narrative is lost. And Meghan? She saw it too. Meghan, who had always believed she could outmaneuver the media, began to realize that Harry's panic was making things worse. Instead of calming the storm, his outbursts fanned the flames. Their strategy fractured. Meghan wanted control, Harry wanted confrontation. Together, they spiraled. This is where Tom Bower's genius cut deepest. He didn't need proof. He didn't need evidence. All he needed was Harry's panic. Because Harry's behavior became the evidence. The more Harry panicked, the more people believed Bower's hints. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, and Harry was losing. Here's a surprising fact. Behind the scenes, some courtiers described Harry as paranoid. He believed leaks were everywhere. He suspected staff, family members, even old friends of betraying him. His world shrank to Meghan and Archie. Everyone else was suspect. And when you live like that, trust evaporates. Once trust is gone, every whisper sounds like truth. But this isn't just palace gossip. This is a man's breakdown. Imagine being Harry, sitting alone late at night, scrolling through headlines questioning if your child is truly yours. Imagine seeing your mother's face in your memory, remembering how she was hounded, and wondering if history is repeating itself. Imagine feeling powerless to stop it. Panic isn't just emotional, it's physical. The racing heart, the clenched fists, the sleepless nights. That's Harry's breaking point. And here's where it becomes heartbreaking. Harry wanted freedom. That's why he left. That's why he broke away from the monarchy, why he gave up titles, why he sought life in California. But freedom hasn't given him peace. Freedom has only amplified the whispers. In Britain, he was protected by the palace machine, even when it stifled him. In America, he's exposed, raw, defenseless. Every whisper finds him. Every rumor follows him. There is no escape. Now, let's talk about perception. Panic doesn't just damage reputation, it erodes authority. For Harry, whose role as a father and husband depends on projecting strength, panic is lethal. The public doesn't forgive weakness in royals. They don't forgive fragility. And so Harry's unraveling became part of the story. He wasn't just the subject of whispers, he was proof of them. But what about Archie? As whispers grew louder, Harry's protectiveness became fiercer. He shielded Archie from the press. He refused to release details. He fought for privacy. Noble, yes, but again, suspicious. Because when people see secrecy, they assume there's something to hide. And that suspicion, once tied to DNA whispers, became unstoppable. Let me pull you in here. If you were a member of the public, watching Harry grow more defensive, Meghan grow more silent, and Archie remain hidden, what would you think? Would you see loving parents protecting their child? Or would you see guilty parents concealing the truth? That's the cruel trick of perception. Love can look like guilt. Protection can look like concealment. And panic always looks like weakness. Harry's breaking point wasn't just about whispers. It was about betrayal. He felt betrayed by his family, who he believed didn't defend him. He felt betrayed by the press, who he already hated. He felt betrayed by palace staff, whom he suspected of leaks. And perhaps, in his darkest moments, he even felt betrayed by fate itself. Cursed to repeat the cycle of whispers that had haunted him since childhood. This is the emotional climax of Harry's story. A man broken not by war, not by scandal, but by whispers. Invisible, intangible, unverifiable whispers. And yet, those whispers did what no battlefield ever could. They brought a prince to his knees. But here's the twist. Harry's panic didn't silence the whispers. It amplified them. Because panic always leaks. Staff see it. Reporters sense it. Biographers like Tom Bower exploit it. Panic is contagious. And soon, the whispers inside the palace began to leak outside, into the press, into the public. And that's where the story turns darker still. Because once whispers leave the palace, they can never be contained. Once they hit the press, they become headlines. And once they become headlines, they become history. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The British press has always fed on scandal. It's their lifeblood, their currency, their obsession. And when whispers about Archie Harrison's paternity began to seep out of palace corridors, the media didn't hesitate. They pounced. Because in the ruthless economy of headlines, nothing sells like royal drama. Especially when that drama questions the very bloodline that defines the monarchy. Let's not pretend this is new. The tabloids built their empires on royal gossip. Diana's struggles, Charles and Camilla's affair, Fergie's scandals. Even the Queen herself, stoic as she was, couldn't escape front-page speculation. But with Harry and Meghan, the appetite reached a fever pitch. Why? Because this was a story that blended everything the press loves: sex, betrayal, secrecy, power, and now, whispers of illegitimacy. Think about how quickly it spread. A few vague hints from Tom Bower, amplified by social media chatter, magnified by hungry reporters. Suddenly, Archie's name was everywhere. Headlines didn't accuse directly. They didn't need to. They asked questions. Why the secrecy around Archie's christening? What are palace insiders whispering? Why does Harry seem so defensive? Questions are more powerful than accusations. Questions plant doubt, and doubt is the press's deadliest weapon. Now let's pause and ask, how much of this was driven by truth, and how much by profit? Tabloids thrive on sales. Online outlets thrive on clicks. YouTube channels, podcasts, blogs, they thrive on speculation. And nothing fuels speculation like an unanswered question. By refusing to play the traditional royal game, hospital steps, public christening, smiling transparency, Harry and Meghan handed the press a gift. They gave them a vacuum, and the press filled it with whispers. And once the press had their narrative, they ran with it. Front pages, breaking news segments, commentary panels debating whether Meghan was manipulative, whether Harry was weak, whether Archie's story added up. They didn't need proof. They only needed intrigue. Every article ended the same way, not with answers, but with more questions. We may never know the truth. Speculation continues. Insiders remain divided. Those phrases don't close the story. They keep it alive. Here's a surprising fact. Some newspapers reportedly saw massive spikes in sales whenever Meghan and Harry's names were in the headlines. Every whisper, every rumor, every lawsuit only made the press richer. Meghan's war with the media, from Chapter 6, didn't silence them, it fattened their wallets. Every time she fought back, they sold another round of papers. Every time Harry bristled, they had a new angle. Panic was profit, and the press didn't just stop at reporting. They shaped the whispers into narratives. Meghan was cast as the schemer, the manipulator, the outsider who threatened the monarchy. Harry was painted as the gullible fool, the lovesick husband blinded by passion. And Archie became the question mark. The innocent child who, in the hands of tabloids, became a headline. It was exploitation, pure and simple. But the press wasn't working alone. Social media poured gasoline on the fire. Twitter threads, Reddit forums, TikTok analysis, videos, all dissecting Meghan's body language, Archie's photos, Harry's interviews. Ordinary people became armchair detectives, comparing baby pictures, speculating about timelines, posting side-by-sides of Harry and James Hewitt. Millions of voices amplifying the whispers until they became deafening. And here's the cruel twist. Meghan and Harry's own choices gave the press even more ammunition. The Netflix series, the Spotify podcasts, the tell-all interviews. Every attempt to control the narrative created more content for the press to spin. Meghan's silence at times, followed by explosive revelations at others, was a feast for tabloids. When she was quiet, they speculated. When she spoke, they dissected. She could not win. Let me ask you this. Was the media simply reporting what the public wanted, or did they create the demand themselves? Did people crave royal scandal, or did the press condition them to crave it? It's a chicken and egg question, but one thing is certain. Once whispers exist, the press makes sure they never die. Look at how they played with language. Words like alleged, insiders claim, reportedly, rumors suggest. These phrases are shields. They protect the press from lawsuits while giving them free rein to print whatever sells. And when it comes to Archie's story, they didn't need to prove anything. They only needed to suggest. Suggestion is poison. Once swallowed, it spreads through the bloodstream of public opinion. And Harry? He knew it. He saw it happening in real time. The same press that hounded his mother was now dissecting his wife and his child. It was his worst nightmare realized. And the more he panicked, the more the press smelled blood. They don't pity panic. They exploit it. They write it into headlines. Harry lashes out. Harry defends Meghan in tense exchange. Harry refuses to answer questions about Archie. Each headline fed the cycle. Each headline deepened the whispers. Now, let's not forget the global dimension. American media treated Meghan and Harry differently. In the US, Meghan was often framed as a victim, a modern woman crushed by outdated tradition. In Britain, she was portrayed as manipulative, divisive, even dangerous. This split narrative meant the whispers weren't just British gossip. They became international debate. Millions of people on both sides of the Atlantic arguing not just about Meghan and Harry, but about Archie's very identity. The press, in their hunger for scandal, turned a baby into a symbol. Archie wasn't just a child anymore. He was a story, a headline, a question mark attached to the monarchy's future. And once the press claims you as their symbol, they never let go. Let's humanize this for a moment. Imagine growing up and discovering that your baby photos were dissected in tabloids, your family's decisions framed as suspicious, your very identity debated by millions of strangers. That's Archie's reality. He didn't choose it, but the press made him live it. And Harry and Meghan, despite their attempts to protect him, couldn't stop it. Now here's the darker layer. The palace itself wasn't innocent. Leaks, whispers, sources close to the family, many of these came from within. Rival factions fed different narratives to different outlets. Team Cambridge, Team Sussex. Each side used the press as a weapon. And Archie was collateral damage. The palace's divide became the press's feast. And the whispers grew louder still. So where does this leave us? On one side, a press machine hungry for scandal. On the other, a couple trying to fight back, but only feeding the fire. And in the middle, a child whose name is forever tied to whispers about DNA. The media didn't create the whispers, but they turned them into a storm that Harry and Meghan could never escape. But storms don't just rage in headlines. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than noise. And Meghan's silence, calculated, deliberate, haunting, became its own story. The press asked, why isn't she answering? Why isn't she denying? Why isn't she fighting harder? That silence, in the public's imagination, became an admission. And that silence leads us directly to the next chapter. Because when Meghan chose not to speak, the world filled in the blanks. And what the world imagined was darker than anything she could have said. Because what came next would change everything, and no one.